I've always been the kind of guy who notices the little things, the way a leaf trembles just before a storm hits, or how the shadows in an empty room seem to shift when you're not looking. But nothing prepared me for the day time itself decided to glitch, freezing everything around me like a paused video, while I was the only one left moving. It started innocently enough, but by the end, it shattered my grip on reality, making me question if we're all just code in some cosmic simulation. My name's Blake Hall. I'm 32, living in this quiet suburb of Seattle called Evergreen Heights. Think rainy afternoons, misty forests edging the neighborhood, and houses that look like they've been standing since the pioneers rolled in. I work as a software engineer for a small tech firm downtown, debugging lines of code that make apps run smoother. Ironic, right? Fixing glitches in virtual worlds, only to stumble into one in the real one. I've got no wild backstory, just a regular life with a cozy apartment, a cat named Shadow who's more ghost than pet, and a habit of late-night walks to clear my head after staring at screens all day. But that one evening in late autumn, when the leaves were turning blood red and the air carried that crisp, foreboding chill, everything changed. It was the kind of night where you feel watched, even though the streets are empty, and I swear, from that moment on, the world hasn't felt quite right. It was around 7 p.m., the sun dipping low behind the evergreens, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. I just wrapped up a long day at the office, another marathon of troubleshooting while our latest update was crashing on certain devices. My head was buzzing with algorithms and error logs, so I decided to skip the bus and walk home, about a mile through the winding paths of the neighborhood park. Evergreen Heights Park isn't huge, but it's got these dense pockets of old-growth trees that make you feel like you've stepped into another era, with fog rolling in from the nearby sound. As I strolled along the gravel trail, crunching leaves under my sneakers, I noticed how unusually still everything seemed. No birds chirping their evening songs, no distant hum of traffic from the highway. Even the wind, which usually whispers through the branches, had gone silent. I shrugged it off at first. Maybe the weather was turning, or I was just tired. But then, about halfway through the park, near the old wooden bench where folks sometimes feed squirrels, it happened. Time froze. Not metaphorically, like in those moments of shock where seconds stretch. No, this was literal. 1 second, I was mid-step, inhaling the damp earth scent, and the next, the world hit pause. A jogger ahead of me, a middle-aged woman in neon leggings, was frozen with one foot hovering above the ground, her ponytail suspended in an unnatural arc. Leaves that had been drifting lazily from the trees hung in midair, defying gravity. A squirrel on a branch nearby was caught in a leap, its tiny body arched impossibly still, and the sounds gone. Utter silence, like the universe had muted itself. My heart pounded in my chest, the only rhythm breaking the void. I could move though. I took a tentative step forward, my shoes scraping the gravel with a sound that echoed too loudly in the quiet. Panic bubbled up, but curiosity kept it at bay. Was this a stroke? A hallucination from too much screen time? I reached out and touched the jogger's arm. Her skin felt real, warm even, but she didn't react. Her eyes stared blankly ahead, unblinking. I spun around, scanning the park. Everything was locked in place. A couple on a distant bench, mid-laugh, their mouths open in frozen joy. A dog chasing a frisbee, both pet and toy suspended inches apart. The sky above was a snapshot, clouds unmoving, no fading light. How long had it been? Seconds? Minutes? Time didn't mean anything anymore. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up, but the clock was stuck at 7:13 p.m. No signal, no updates. I tried calling my best friend, Alex, but the line didn't even ring. It just hummed with static. That's when the unease really set in, crawling up my spine like icy fingers. What if this was permanent? What if I was trapped in this limbo forever, wandering a world of statues? I started walking faster, weaving through the frozen figures, my breath coming in short gasps. The park felt larger now, the trees looming taller, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. I swear, in the corner of my eye, shadows flickered where they shouldn't, subtle shifts, like the glitch was imperfect, leaking something from behind the curtain. As I neared the park's edge, where the trail met the suburban streets, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. A car at the intersection, headlights piercing the dusk, but utterly still. The driver inside, a man with a beard, had his hand on the wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. But wait, his reflection in the side mirror, it blinked. No, that couldn't be. I froze myself, staring. The man in the car was immobile, but in the mirror, his eyes darted, meeting mine for a split second before snapping back. Was I imagining it? My mind raced. Maybe this wasn't a freeze for everyone. Maybe others were aware but couldn't move. Or worse, maybe I'd slipped into some parallel layer, a glitch where realities overlapped. I approached the car cautiously, my footsteps echoing unnaturally. Peering through the window, I saw the dashboard clock, also stuck at 7:13. But as I leaned closer, a faint whisper escaped the vents, like radio static forming words. Not alone. I jumped back, heart slamming against my ribs. Was that real, or my imagination filling the silence? Shaken, I bolted toward home, the neighborhood streets now a eerie tableau. Houses with lights on, but no flicker from TVs inside. Kids' bikes abandoned mid-ride, wheels still as if glued. The mist from earlier had thickened, curling around lampposts that cast frozen beams of light. Every few steps, I felt it, that prickling sensation of being observed. Glances over my shoulder revealed nothing, but the hairs on my neck stood up. About a block from my apartment, I passed the local coffee shop, its door propped open. Inside, patrons were paused, a barista pouring coffee that hung in a liquid arc from the pot, customers with mugs halfway to their lips. One woman, though, her eyes, they seemed to follow me as I walked by, not blatantly, but a subtle shift in her pupils. I stopped, staring back. Her face was expressionless, but those eyes held a plea, or a warning. What the hell is happening? I muttered to myself, my voice sounding hollow. Finally, I reached my building, a modest 3-story walk-up with ivy climbing the bricks. Fumbling with my keys, I glanced at the street, still frozen. Inside, the hallway was dim, emergency lights casting long shadows. My cat was usually waiting by the door, but when I entered my apartment, he was mid-prowl across the living room, frozen like everything else. His green eyes gleamed unnaturally in the low light. I collapsed onto the couch, trying to process. How long could this last? What if it never ended? I paced, checking windows. The world outside remained a still life painting. Hours passed, or what felt like hours, since my phone's clock didn't budge. Exhaustion crept in, but sleep felt impossible. That's when I noticed the first anomaly in my own space. My old grandfather clock in the corner, a family heirloom, its pendulum stuck mid-swing. But as I watched, it twitched, just once, a tiny jerk forward. The twitch sent a wave of dread through me. Was time trying to restart? Or was something else at play? I sat there, staring, willing it to move again. Nothing. The silence pressed in, heavy and oppressive. Then, from the kitchen, a soft drip, water from the faucet. But how? Everything was frozen. I crept over, peering into the sink. A single drop hung from the tap, quivering slightly. As I reached out to touch it, the drop fell, splashing into the basin with a sound that reverberated like thunder in the quiet. And in that instant, a shadow passed across the window, not outside, but reflected from within. I whirled around, but the room was empty. My pulse raced. Was I not alone after all? The thought chilled me deeper than the freeze itself. What if this glitch had let something in, some entity from the voids between moments? I decided to venture out again, unable to sit still. Back on the streets, the mist had evolved into a fog so thick it swallowed the houses beyond a few yards. I walked aimlessly, calling out occasionally, "Hello? Anyone?" But only echoes answered, distorted and faint. That's when I stumbled upon the playground at the end of my block. Swings hung motionless, but one chain creaked ever so slightly, as if pushed by an invisible hand. A child's laughter echoed from nowhere, brief and ghostly, cutting off abruptly. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I backed away, heart thundering. This wasn't just a pause, it was unraveling, revealing cracks in the fabric of reality. What lay beneath? I hurried back toward the park, drawn by some morbid pull, the fog closing in like a living thing. Deeper into the trees, the stillness felt alive now, pulsing with unspoken threats. Branches seemed to reach closer, leaves suspended like waiting claws. I spotted the jogger again, still frozen, but her shadow on the ground. It had lengthened, stretching unnaturally toward me. Impossible, with no moving sun. I ran then, breath ragged, until I collapsed near the bench, gasping. And there, carved into the wood, fresh scratches that hadn't been there before. "You see what they don't." My blood turned to ice. Who, or what, had done that? The words burned into my mind, a message from the glitch itself. As the night wore on, though time remained stuck, I began to notice patterns. Every so often, a tiny movement, a leaf trembling, a distant car's headlight flickering faintly. It was like the world was glitching back to life in fragments, but each twitch brought a new unease. In one house I peered into, a family at dinner, forks poised, but one plate had steam rising, impossibly, while the others were cold. In another, a TV screen, frozen on a news broadcast, but the ticker at the bottom scrolled a single word. Error. My mind reeled. Was this a simulation breaking down? Had I somehow stepped outside the program? The fog thickened further, reducing visibility to arm's length. Sounds started creeping in, whispers, not words, but murmurs like a crowd just out of sight. They grew louder, circling me. I pressed on, disoriented, until I realized I was lost in my own neighborhood. Panic surged. Then, a shape loomed ahead, a figure, not frozen like the others. Tall, indistinct in the mist. It stood motionless at first, then turned slowly toward me. No face visible, just a silhouette that seemed to absorb the light. It didn't move closer, but the air around it warped, like heat haze on a summer road. "Who are you?" I whispered, voice trembling. No answer. But the whispers intensified, forming a chorus of indistinct pleas. I turned and fled, branches whipping my face, until I burst out onto a familiar street. The figure didn't follow, or did it? Shadows danced at the edges of my vision. Back in my apartment, I barricaded the door with a chair, though I knew it was futile. Shadow the cat still frozen, but his eyes, they tracked me across the room. Impossible. I huddled on the bed, waiting for dawn that might never come, the whispers now seeping through the walls. What if this was the new normal? What if I was the glitch, not the world? But then, subtly at first, things began to stir. A clock tick, a distant horn. Time was thawing, but with it came a dread that whatever had caused this wasn't done. As the world blinked back to life around me, I felt eyes on me, unseen watchers from the freeze. And that's when I knew this wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The first thing that moved was the second hand on my wristwatch. It jerked forward with a sound like a bone snapping, then another tick, then another, until the room filled with the frantic chatter of clocks remembering how to exist. Shadow unfroze mid-stride, landed softly, and immediately arched his back, hissing at nothing in the corner. Outside, a car engine coughed to life somewhere down the block. Tires screeched, and a woman's voice shouted, "What the hell just happened?" Like she'd been holding that scream for hours. The world exhaled all at once. Dogs barked. A baby cried 2 apartments over. The refrigerator hummed back into being. Everything rushed forward as if someone had slammed the play button after an eternity on pause. I sat on the edge of my bed, soaked in cold sweat, staring at my hands like they belonged to a stranger. 10 minutes later my phone buzzed itself to death with notifications, missed calls, group chats exploding, news alerts screaming about a global micro outage that lasted exactly 0 seconds according to every server on the planet. 0 seconds. That was the official story. A simultaneous hiccup in cellular towers, power grids, satellites, you name it. The internet dubbed it the blink. People laughed it off as the biggest collective lag in history. I knew better. For me, the blink had lasted at least 6 hours. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes I saw that faceless silhouette in the fog, felt the weight of 1,000 frozen stares. Around 4 a.m. I opened my laptop and started searching. Forums were already flooding with theories: mass hallucination, solar flare, 5G weapon testing, simulation reboot. A few posts stood out, buried deep in fringe subreddits, people claiming they'd been aware during the blink. One user, u/stillframe42, wrote, "I was driving. My daughter was in the back seat singing. Then silence. I could move, but they couldn't. I screamed until my throat bled and nothing changed for 9 minutes. When time came back my daughter asked why I was crying. She didn't remember any of it. 9 minutes. Someone else said 43. Another swore it was 2 full days. The numbers never matched, but the terror did. I bookmarked every thread, my hands shaking so badly I kept mistyping my password. By morning the rain had returned, the soft Seattle kind that never quite commits. I forced myself out of the apartment because staying inside felt like waiting for the next freeze. The neighborhood looked normal, painfully normal. The jogger from the park waved at me as she passed, earbuds in, ponytail swinging, no memory of hovering in midair like a photograph. I waved back with a smile that probably looked psychotic. At the coffee shop the barista greeted me with the same, "Hey Blake, usual?" As always. The woman whose eyes had tracked me yesterday was there again, reading a paperback, steam curling from her mug exactly where it had been suspended. She glanced up, met my gaze for half a second, then looked down again. Nothing. No recognition. I ordered my coffee with a voice that didn't sound like mine and got out of there before I started screaming. Work was impossible. My boss sent everyone home early, said the whole office was off after the blink. I spent the afternoon walking, because moving felt safer than standing still. That's when I noticed the first echo. I passed the playground again. The swings were moving gently in the breeze, but one seat, the red one on the left, was swinging higher than the wind could possibly push it, back and forth in a perfect, rhythmic arc. No kid nearby. No footprints in the wet sand beneath. I stood there watching until the arc slowed, stopped, then reversed direction, swinging backward as if an invisible child had just hopped off and walked away. The chains didn't creak. They never made a sound. That night I started seeing the delays. It was subtle at first. I'd wave at my neighbor Mrs. Delgado watering her roses, and her smile would arrive half a second after her face turned toward me, like a badly synced video call. I'd drop a spoon in the kitchen and the clatter would hit my ears a heartbeat late. Shadow would blink, and his eyelids would finish closing long after his pupils had vanished. I told myself it was trauma, that my brain was still catching up, but deep down I knew the freeze had left cracks, and something was seeping through. On the third night after the blink, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to total silence again. Not the comfortable quiet of a sleeping building, but the same suffocating absence of sound I'd felt in the park. My digital clock was frozen at 3:12. The rain against the window had stopped mid-drop, beads of water clinging to the glass like jewels. Shadow was a black statue on the foot of the bed, one paw raised. I sat up slowly, every hair on my body standing at attention. This time I wasn't alone in the movement. Across the room, in the corner where the light never quite reaches, something unfolded from the shadows. Tall, thin, wrong-angled. It rose the way smoke rises, but deliberate, until it matched the height of the ceiling even though the ceiling is only 8 feet high. No face, just a suggestion of where a face should be, like a thumb smudge on wet ink. It didn't walk. It was simply closer with every breath I took. I couldn't scream. My throat had forgotten how. All I could do was watch as it tilted its knothead, studying me the way I'd studied the frozen world days ago. Then it raised one impossible limb and pointed, straight at my chest, with a finger that kept extending, longer, until the tip hovered an inch from my sternum. The air around it rippled like heat above asphalt. That's when the whisper came, not in my ears but behind my eyes, a voice made of static and old television snow. You weren't supposed to stay awake. The finger touched me, not flesh, more like a sudden drop in temperature that sank straight through skin and bone. I spread from my chest in fractal patterns I could feel branching under my ribs. I gasped, and the world slammed back into motion. Rain hammered the window again. Shadow yowled and bolted under the bed. My clock flipped to 3:13 and kept going. I tore off my shirt expecting frostbite, but there was nothing, just skin, except for a perfect circle of goosebumps right over my heart that refused to go down no matter how warm the room got. I didn't sleep again for 4 days. Instead, I researched, obsessively. I learned that throughout history there are scattered accounts of dead minutes, moments when time reportedly stopped for a single person while the world continued. Sailors in the 1700s writing about calm patches in the ocean where the waves froze mid-crash. A Roman legionary's journal describing an entire battle pausing while he alone walked among statues of men and horses. Always one witness, always dismissed as madness. I printed everything, covered my bedroom walls with articles and red string until it looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Somewhere in the chaos I found a pattern. Every recorded incident happened within 50 miles of Evergreen Heights. This area, my home. On the 7th day after the blink, the delays got worse. People on the street would finish entire sentences half a second after their lips stopped moving. Cars rolled forward a full tire rotation after the light turned red. Once, I watched a barista hand a customer change, and the coins hung in the air between their palms for 3 solid seconds before gravity remembered them. Nobody else reacted. They just kept talking, laughing, living half a heartbeat out of sync with their own bodies. I started wearing headphones everywhere, blasting music so I wouldn't have to hear the lag. That evening I came home to find my front door ajar. I never leave it open. Shadow usually greets me with figure eights around my ankles, but the apartment was silent. I stepped inside, heart already sprinting. The living room looked normal, except every digital clock in the place, microwave, stove, TV, was flashing midnight in perfect unison. And there, on the couch where I'd sat frozen in fear a week ago, sat the silhouette. Solid now, real enough that it dented the cushions. Still no face, just a void that hurt to look at directly, like staring into a black sun. It raised its hands slowly and beckoned with one too long finger. I should have run. Instead I heard myself ask, voice cracking, "What do you want from me?" The answer came in layers, as if 100 voices spoke at once from very far away and very close inside my skull. To finish what was started, you saw the pause. Now you must see the gap. The lights flickered. When they steadied, the figure was gone, but the couch cushion still held its shape, slowly rising back to normal like memory foam forgetting a ghost. On the coffee table lay something that hadn't been there before, an old Polaroid photograph. I picked it up with trembling fingers. It showed the playground at night, the red swing perfectly still. Standing beneath it was a little girl in a yellow raincoat, face blurred just enough that you couldn't make out features. On the white border beneath the image, someone had written in shaky handwriting, "Find me before the next blink, or stay behind forever." I turned the photo over. On the back, in the same handwriting, Evergreen Heights Elementary, 1993. The school was abandoned 15 years ago after a fire no one ever explained. Everyone in town knows the stories. Kids daring each other to sneak inside, rumors of lockers that slammed shut on their own, hallways that stretched longer than they should. I'd always laughed those stories off. Not anymore. I knew where I had to go. The rain had picked up by the time I stepped out into the night, the Polaroid clutched in my fist like a talisman, or a curse. Evergreen Heights Elementary sat on the outskirts of town, a forgotten relic tucked against the forest's edge, where the trees seemed to lean in as if guarding secrets. Built in the 1950s, it had been a cheerful place once, all finger paint murals and recess bells echoing through the valleys. But after the fire in 2008, which gutted half the building without a single witness or cause ever pinned down, the town boarded it up and let nature reclaim it. Vines choked the chain-link fence now, and broken windows stared out like empty eyes. Kids whispered about ghosts, about shadows that moved when you weren't looking, but I'd never bought into that until now. The photo's message burned in my mind. Find me before the next blink, or stay behind forever. 1993. That was the year before I was born, but something about it tugged at the edges of my memory, like a half-remembered dream. I drove there in my beat-up Honda, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield, each swish sounding like a countdown. The delays were everywhere now. Streetlights flickered on a split second after I passed under them. Raindrops hit the glass with a lag that made the world feel like it was buffering. I parked a block away, not wanting to draw attention, though at midnight in a downpour, the streets were deserted. Slipping through a gap in the fence, I felt the air thicken, cooler than it should be, carrying the faint scent of charred wood even after all these years. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and overgrown weeds pushing up through cracked pavement. The main entrance was padlocked, but a side door hung ajar, its hinges rusted into a perpetual creak that the wind teased into whispers. Pushing inside, I was hit by the musty odor of decay, mold, old paper, and something metallic underneath, like ozone after a lightning strike. The hallway stretched before me, longer than I remembered from childhood field trips, the linoleum floor buckled and peeling. Lockers lined the walls, some dented, others ajar with forgotten artifacts spilling out, a yellow notebook, a single sneaker caked in dust. I moved slowly, my footsteps echoing unnaturally, each one arriving a heartbeat late, as if the building itself was out of sync. The flashlight caught glimpses of faded posters on the walls. Reading takes you places, but the colors seemed muted, drained, like the life had been leached out. And then, the first anomaly, a clock above what used to be the principal's office, its hands frozen at 7:13, the same time as the blink. I stared, my breath catching. Was this ground zero? Deeper in, the corridors branched like veins, and I followed an instinct, or maybe a pull, toward the gymnasium where the fire had started. Whispers followed me now, not the static kind from before, but soft, childlike murmurs that faded when I turned to listen. Hide and seek, you're it, one seemed to say, but it dissolved into the rain pattering on the roof. My skin crawled. I wasn't alone here. Shadows pooled in corners, deeper than they should be, and more than once, I swore they shifted just out of my beam's reach. The photo in my pocket felt heavier, warmer, like it was alive. I pulled it out again, studying the blurred girl in the yellow raincoat. Who was she? Why me? The gym doors loomed ahead, charred and warped, but they swung open with a groan when I pushed, as if expecting me. Inside, the space was vast and echoing, moonlight filtering through holes in the roof where beams had collapsed. The basketball court was a ruin, lines faded, hoops dangling like nooses. In the center, though, something was wrong, impossibly wrong. A merry-go-round, the kind from old playgrounds, sat there, rusted but intact, as if transplanted from outside. It shouldn't be here. The gym had been for dodgeball and assemblies, not playground equipment, and it was spinning, slowly, ever so slowly, in the still air, with no wind to push it. The creak of its axle was the only sound, rhythmic, hypnotic. I approached, flashlight trembling, and that's when I saw her, the girl from the photo, or at least her silhouette, sitting on one of the merry-go-round seats, her yellow raincoat vivid against the gloom. She wasn't spinning with it. She remained still as the platform turned beneath her, facing away from me. My mouth went dry. "Hello?" I whispered, the word hanging in the air before echoing back distorted. No response, but the merry-go-round slowed, stopping with her directly in front of me. She didn't turn, but a small hand extended from the coat, pointing toward the far wall where the fire damage was worse, blackened bricks and melted plastic bleachers. I followed the point, my beam illuminating a mural that had somehow survived, though scorched, children playing in a field, but their faces were smudged, eyes hollow. Below it, scratched into the wall in childish scrawl, "The paws is where they hide." My heart hammered. Who hides? Before I could ask, the girl's voice came, soft and echoing, not from her but from all around. The watchers, they fixed the glitches, but sometimes, we slipped through. I spun back to her, but she was gone, the seat empty, the merry-go-round still. Only the raincoat remained draped over the bar, damp as if recently worn. Panic clawed at me, but curiosity, or fate, pushed me forward. I picked up the coat, and something fell from its pocket, a small, tarnished key, engraved with Library 1993. The school library was down another hall, or what was left of it. I hurried there, the whispers growing louder, overlapping now, like a classroom full of kids reciting lessons out of order. The delays intensified. My flashlight beam lagged behind my movements, creating ghost images in the dark. The library door was locked, but the key fit perfectly, turning with a click that reverberated like thunder. Inside, bookshelves sagged under dust and debris, volumes scattered like fallen soldiers. In the center, a reading circle of tiny chairs, and on one, a yearbook open to 1993. I flipped through it with shaking hands, class photos, smiling kids in outdated clothes. But on page 47, a girl in a yellow raincoat, Emily Voss, age 8, her bio, loves hide and seek, wants to be a time traveler when she grows up. The photo was crisp here, her eyes bright, but as I watched, the image blurred, just like the Polaroid. A note tucked inside. The blink happened here first, during recess. I saw it freeze. They took me to fix it. Don't let them take you too. Took her? Who? The whispers swelled, forming words. She stayed awake, like you. I backed away, knocking over a stack of books. Dust billowed, and in the cloud, shapes formed, tall, thin figures, the same as the one in my apartment. Not one, but several, unfolding from the shadows between shelves. They didn't advance quickly. They glided, their forms rippling like disturbed water. The air grew cold, my breath visible in puffs that hung too long before dissipating. "What do you want?" I managed, voice echoing back at me delayed, mocking. The closest one tilted its void face, and the static voice bloomed in my mind. "Balance. The simulation corrects anomalies. You are residue." Residue? The world around me stuttered then. The rain outside paused mid-fall, visible through a cracked window. A moth in the air froze mid-flutter. Another blink smaller, localized. Time was fracturing again, but this time, I felt it pulling at me, like gravity from a black hole. The figures reached out, their fingers extending, brushing the edges of my vision with frost. I ran, clutching the yearbook, bursting from the library into the hall. The building seemed to warp, corridors twisting longer, doors appearing where walls had been. Whispers chased me. "Stay, see the gap." I glanced back. The figures were closer, their silhouettes merging with the shadows, absorbing light. In my panic, I tripped over debris, sprawling onto the floor. The yearbook skidded away, open to Emily's page. As I scrambled up, her photo moved. Her eyes shifted, meeting mine, and her lips formed silent words. "Break the loop. Break the loop? How?" The figures loomed, the cold intensifying, numbing my limbs. Then it hit me, the clock in the office, frozen at 7:13. Ground zero. I bolted toward it, the world glitching around me, floor tiles lifting slightly before settling, lights flickering in patterns that spelled error in Morse code. The figures were steps behind, their presence a weight pressing on my back. Reaching the office, I smashed the glass case with my elbow, no pain, just determination, and yanked the clock from the wall. Its hands were stuck, but as I gripped them, they twitched under my fingers. The voices thundered in my head. "Do not interfere." But I forced the hands forward, past 7:13, grinding against invisible resistance. Sparks flew, actual sparks, like short-circuiting wires. The building shook, dust raining from the ceiling. The figures halted, their forms destabilizing, edges fraying like bad code. I kept turning, faster, until the hands spun wildly. A crack split the air, not sound but sensation, like reality tearing. The whispers turned to screams, fading into static. Then release. Time surged forward. The rain resumed outside, harder. The moth fluttered away. The figures dissolved into wisps, vanishing with a final echo. "It will return." I collapsed against the wall, the clock shattered at my feet, hands finally at rest on 12 o'clock. Midnight. Reset. I stumbled out of the school into the pouring rain, yearbook and raincoat under my arm. The delays were gone, everything synced perfectly, painfully normal. Driving home, the world felt solid again, but fragile, like glass after a crack. Shadow greeted me at the door, purring as if nothing had happened. I burned the photo and the note that night, watching the flames curl the edges until only ash remained. Emily's yearbook I kept, hidden in a drawer, a reminder. Weeks passed. The blink became old news, memes and conspiracy podcasts fading into the background. I went back to work, debugging code, but now every glitch felt personal, a whisper from the gap. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I feel it, a slight lag in my reflection's blink, a shadow that lingers too long. And at night, when the rain taps the window, I hear faint murmurs. Next time, was it over? Or just paused? I don't know. But if time freezes again, I'll be ready. Because now I see the cracks. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real horror, not the freeze, but knowing you're the only one who notices.